Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Brissenden-Smith, partner with Impact Media Partners, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this special live event in advance of Earth Day, featuring preview footage from the powerful new film Single Use Planet, coming to public television in late 2024, and a live panel discussion with leading experts from the Ohio River Valley Institute, Inclusive Louisiana, and Plastic Pollution Coalition, moderated by energy reporter Reid Frazier. We encourage you to share your questions today for our panel using either the chat or Q&A feature, and we'll have an opportunity to take some of your questions later in the discussion. Today's event will focus on the politics, science, and environmental impact of single-use plastics. At this time, we'll watch a brief trailer for Single Use Planet, and then Reid will come back and join us to introduce our panel and begin the conversation. Thank you for being here.
Plastic, the miracle stuff that's become indispensable to modern life, except for what's not. The throwaway, single-use trash that overwhelms all efforts to recycle. Can the genie be put back in the bottle? We'll look at a way to stop the deluge and what's holding that effort back.
Have you gotten to see what's going on at the Shell petrochemical facility, also known as the cracker plant? 4,500 trade jobs, and it's going to peak this summer at 6,500.
They're saying that they're going to get rid of plastic. You know, they're trying to get rid of plastic straws and all of these other stuff. But the plants are still coming in.
A lot of people getting diagnosed with cancer. But when you're burying young people, when you're burying middle-aged people, that's not their time.
I think it's all about money. I think money play a big part in them letting these industries come in here.
We keep buying plastic, using plastic, so they're going to make it here or elsewhere.
There are more lobbyists than there are state legislators.
There is nothing nefarious about that. It is an open and transparent process.
Bags, I tried to ban plastic bags in Louisiana. That went over like a lead balloon. He got killed in committee. I couldn't get it out onto the Senate floor.
Lobbyists don't only bring education and expertise, they also organize fundraisers.
Government has lost its purpose. It's supposed to be here for people, not bottom lines and Wall Street and special interests.
Welcome everyone to this great panel discussion we're going to have today about this film. It's about a subject that is close to a lot of the work that I do in Pittsburgh. I work for a public radio show called the Allegheny Front. We air stories about the environment in Pennsylvania and throughout the country over the NPR network. I cover energy, which veers into the topic that we're going to discuss today. I started covering the fracking boom in the early 2010s and quickly started covering the petrochemical industry because it, as we all know, it is a part and parcel of oil and gas in the US. Today, we're going to discuss this topic with three people who play a role in the documentary Single Use Planet. We're joined by Gail LeBoeuf. I hope I'm saying that right. She's co-founder and co-executive director of Inclusive Louisiana. It's a group that's focused on social, racial, and environmental justices in Louisiana, in the part that a lot of people know as Cancer Alley. We'll also be joined by Jackie Nunez. She's Advocacy and Engagement Manager for Plastic Pollution Coalition. She created The Last Plastic Straw, a campaign to educate the public about the impacts of single-use plastic. And our final guest, last but not least, is Sean O'Leary. He's somebody I've spoken with a lot of times in the past. He's senior researcher for the Ohio River Valley Institute. Sean is a native of West Virginia, and he's written about coal, natural gas, and their role in the economies of Appalachia. So we are going to, if we were all here, we'd be clapping for our three panelists. But I wanted to start with you, Gail. We were, just before the chat started, we were speaking about the love-hate relationship that you have with plastic, living near a lot of these plants in Louisiana. Just tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of how you've kind of you know what impact plastic has had on your life.
Well, actually, I worked 24 years in a plastic bottling company, and that made bottles from Coke, Coke products, mayonnaise jars, even fruit jars. It was the gamut. And I must say that we recycled and we kept all of our resin, all our residue in-house, and we recycled a lot of it. What you're seeing today versus what was back in the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s is a whole different ballgame. You're seeing, you know, when you go to the beaches, you're seeing plastic just floating around, and people have no regards for like cleaning up after themselves, or it just become convenient to dispose of it, and it's going to be a problem, especially with there being more plastic made than being consumed, and what to do with it after you discard it. So for me, I've already started using my old dishes I have. I call them my antiques. Well, if they break, they break. If a cup cracks, I throw it away. If a plate cracks, I throw it away. Right now, that keeps me from having to buy these things, but I know there are a lot of people who grew up on the single-use plastic paper plate, paper cups. So, you know, what is to be done about all that? Who is the inventor that's going to take us to the next step for renewable goods that we need and for food that we need?
Yeah, that's a great point. So that brings me to Jackie. This is something that you've been working on. Tell us maybe about your career, the last plastic straw, or anything else you want to tell us about your work. You know, Gail was talking about seeing plastic you know, in the water. We've all seen it, and it's really kind of makes everyone sad when they see it. So tell us about your work and how you got started in this issue.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I started in California. This originated in Santa Cruz, California. Before that, I was living in a lot of different places. I was river guiding, kayak guiding everywhere I went. The place was trashed. I called myself a slacktivist turned activist. I really didn't get much involved. I was always moving. But I got to a point in Santa Cruz where it was just too much. It was exponential, the amount of plastic I was seeing everywhere. And also when I got to Santa Cruz, I was able to stay in one place and volunteer. And so it did start kind of similar to Gail, like the downstream, when you start to see it, you know, getting in the water, getting in our environment, and it's not being taken care of. And that really opened my eyes. And once I started, I went down this rabbit hole of learning about it and volunteering for these cleanups. I got to a point where I was very overwhelmed. This was like 2009. When you start to study the whole trajectory of this, like you said, I'm sure you went down that rabbit hole as well, is the frackaging boom, where they made, Rebecca Altman coined that term, which I think is just so appropriate. You know, we started seeing things just overly packaged and way too much plastic and convenience happening, and it was just overspilling. There was no amount of recycling or even reclamation could keep up with the amount that was being produced. You could see the shoot up for that. So that's what I was seeing, but I was just overwhelmed. I didn't know where to start. The analogy I give is if you see, you know, a bathtub overflowing, you wouldn't start mopping. So the cleanup seemed futile, even though it was a great, you know, last point of defense of getting it in the water. I was living above the Monterey Bay Marine Sanctuary and wanted to really keep those beaches clean. But at the same time, it just seemed futile if we weren't going upstream. And and stopping at the source. And that's where I got the idea for the last plastic straw. My last plastic straw moment, I like to call it, was when I got served a glass of water at a beachside bar in Santa Cruz overlooking this Monterey Bay Marine Sanctuary. And that's when I had the idea that we would serve straws upon request, at least to start, like this waste, this what we were doing with this stuff. And I've worked in restaurants and bars, and my brother owns a restaurant, and I knew that the no ask would be a big ask, and it would be a way to just open up people's eyes and a point of engagement about this issue. It really wasn't about the plastic straw; it was about single-use plastic, but it was a way to start the message and to think about what we were doing. Even people that were doing cleanups with me, we would go out after for a bite to eat or whatever, and they were all sucking on straws. I'm like, did you not just see what we picked up? These were like environmentalists, and they weren't connecting those dots. So I knew I had something there. It was literally in front of our noses, and we got desensitized to it. And my hunch just proved to be right. Like it really did kind of shift. And then when the real turning point was when that turtle video went viral with the straw stuck up the nose. And that kind of really blew it up. And so at that point on, from 2016, it's actually quite a blur for me. It's just been going crazy and gangbusters, but it really kind of proved to be that gateway issue that I always thought it would be, and a way of engagement to get people talking about the bigger problem. And careful what I ask for, because here we are. And now I call it the key to the door. Everyone's talking about plastic. It's like, how do we solve this problem? So that's kind of how I started and where I'm at now.
I think I know the video you're talking about. I'm pretty sure my daughter used it in one of her school presentations in the last few years. So
BBC Futures just did a whole story on that, like just revisiting that video and the impact it's had. I can share a link too if I find that. So
great. Sean, I want to get to you. You have been writing about a different aspect of the plastics industry. You've been really digging into the economic data around the plastics industry that has grown in Western Pennsylvania in the last 10 years. Tell me how you got interested in that topic.
My and the Ohio River Valley Institute's initial focus and primary focus is on economic development for a region that's suffered pretty badly, going all the way back to the collapse of the steel industry in the 1970s and 1980s, and has been struggling to find its footing. And, as we heard in the introductory excerpt, we heard a prominent Pennsylvania legislator trumpeting the number of jobs being created in conjunction with the construction of an ethane cracker in Beaver County, Pennsylvania. And that's indicative of something that has happened in a region that for decades has struggled economically. The development of the Marcellus and Utica natural gas fields was greeted by policymakers throughout the region as being an economic godsend. It was frequently referred to as an economic game changer. And of course, it's a region whose game needed to be changed. The problem is that has not worked out, either in the natural gas boom itself, nor has it worked out with the downstream industries coming from the natural gas boom, the primary one of which, of course, is petrochemicals and plastics, and now more recently, hydrogen.
I think we have some clips that we're going to show from the movie Single Use Planet. And so Kate's, I think, is our master of ceremony. So why don't you take it away?
I got a crown up in the kingdom, ain't that good news?
1,000 miles downstream from Pennsylvania, where the Mississippi meets the Louisiana bayous, the plastic industry, again invited by elected office holders, has been welcomed by some but not all. And as in rural Pennsylvania, the issue is over the choice of which industry was brought in.
WESA is proposing to invest $9.4 billion in Louisiana to construct and operate what will be one of the most innovative single-site ethylene and propylene production facilities in the world.
Pollution from the many petrochemical plants along a stretch of the Mississippi River known as Cancer Alley is not the only issue at play. Many of the plants exist on former sugarcane plantations, including those surrounding St. James, a community originally founded as Freetown by African Americans emancipated from slavery. The local citizens became further incensed after learning that Formosa would build on top of sites where enslaved plantation workers were buried, likely their own ancestors. But it's the growing loss now of family members and neighbors and fears for the health of their children that has them filling meeting halls at public hearings to stop the Formosa plant from being built.
I wish they had one of you women up there, and I think we would stand a fair chance. Because women, they think about their children and their grandchildren and what do they really want.
I sat down the other day and I took out a page and numbered it from 1 to 50. I got to 35, and that's 35 people that I know personally who have died from cancer just in this area.
So that's very powerful images. Gail, I want to talk with you about Cancer Alley and what it's like to be there. It's kind of an open-ended question. We could talk about the specifics of the Formosa plant that is, proposed for there, but maybe we could just talk about what's it like to see so many people get sick around you and wonder or suspect that it's these plants that are, spewing out all these chemicals that is the cause.
What's so alarming is that most of the people who live here, they're now beginning to realize of the 20,000 people that lives in St. James Parish, they are in tune to the fact that a lot of our health issues is directly related to the carcinogens that comes from these plants or the particulate matter that's PM 2.5 to PM 10. Now, Formosa itself will bring on a type of pollution that we didn't have, which is ethylene oxide. We have benzene here, and that is part of our cumulative carcinogen pollution that has us with a lot of ills and had us number 3 in the state of Louisiana during COVID. So with the Harvard study, we know that was directly related to why COVID had us as number 3. It's our compromised immune systems.
What can you describe the reaction from sort of local and state officials when you bring these issues up? You say we're all getting sick, we're suffering, we have these high COVID rates. What's the reaction like?
Their tumor registry doesn't say that. So they deny it. It's deny, deflect, and reject. That's what they do. And but recently a tumor registry just said that they could be a little bit wrong, just a little bit. So that's the closest we've ever come to them acknowledging that, that something is amiss. You don't have all of these plants lining the Mississippi River and have the amount of cancer we have without it being the number 1 cause.
Is this something that you've experienced personally with your family or anybody?
Repeat that?
Just have you, I've been to a lot of places in Louisiana and frankly in Western Pennsylvania near industrial sites where people will look at every house in their neighborhood and they'll point out all the people who have gotten cancer. And is that sort of a typical thing that you could do in your neighborhood?
Oh, yes. We recently purchased a home up in the Convent area, and a young man, 55 years old, succumbed to cancer on Monday. I knew him. He called me Mama. So this weighs heavily on me, that this 55-year-old man who have left a wife and a young daughter, 13 years old, have succumbed to cancer. And he and I would talk about the plants all the time. And I would tell him, you don't want your sons working in these plants, because he has older children. If they do anything, go in there and get an education to go and do something else.
Is that what got you into this work in environmental justice in Louisiana?
Yes, realizing that there are people who will prey upon the weak of us, or think we so weak and so benign that we can't figure out we're being used as a sacrifice zone. And that's what St. James Parish is, and a lot of our neighboring parishes. We are sacrifice zones. It doesn't matter that we're going to get sick and die of cancer. You know, it's all about the almighty dollar. The top 1% has literally taken over the world the same way they've taken over our little world, by lobbyists going to our councilmen and getting them to be on board. How can a councilman who live around all the pollution be voted in yes? It's so benign to even think about it. You know, how can you vote yes when you live there among all of the odors and the disease?
I think we have a couple other clips, and we're going to come back to Gail, but let's roll with the next clip.
As Americans continue to use more single-use plastic per person than any other nation, a trend that also drives the pollution involved with making it, the question becomes, can the political will be found to solve this ever-growing problem? Over 380 million tons of new plastic is being made each year. And in the U.S., where much of it is produced, only a small fraction of the waste is being recycled. We're also exporting our single-use debris to other countries, some with poor waste management where it can end up where it doesn't belong. Proponents of a federal bill called the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act hope Congress can agree on a solution.
It's practical and it's pragmatic. It's actually built on local and state ordinances that have actually worked. And we're dealing with it from extraction to waste.
It will phase out unnecessary plastic products. It limits exports of plastic waste to other countries. It makes producers responsible for their plastic waste. It puts a moratorium or a pause on new and expanded plastic production facilities.
We want to have a temporary halt on that with this bill to be able to even do an environmental assessment.
A bill that would phase out single-use plastics and thus reduce the need for more industrial production to make it has not been popular with the industry.
It will risk nearly 900,000 jobs and put nearly $400 billion of economic activity at risk.
What you see in this bill is it's more of a punishment tool on businesses, on consumers. It is trying to change behavior through punishment.
So, Jackie, I wanted to send this next set of questions to you. I guess, how hard has it been to get laws through, passed either locally, state, or through the federal government to somehow do something about all of the plastic that's getting into the environment?
It's difficult, but we've made a lot of headway on the local and state level. And that's also what built the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act on the federal level. As you can imagine, the mess that our government is on the federal level, you know, lately, it's been harder. Right now, that comprehensive bill has been touted as a partisan bill, but there's really nothing partisan about it. It should be bipartisan, but we've had all the supporters have all been Democratic so far. I just shared with you guys to share in the chat, we have a petition where you can basically ask your local legislator to support this Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act. And like I said in the clip, that it's practical and it's pragmatic and it's based on things like bottle bills and it's kind of old ways that we used to do things, right? And take the bottle back and have a deposit system and just really kind of practical things. And I think one thing I want to reiterate too is that it's kind of the baseline of what the U.S. can do right now. It wouldn't preempt any stronger laws that you have on the local or state level. It would just be a starting point that we can have some uniformity in this so that U.S., if they really were serious about handling their plastic waste problem, which I like to say wasteful plastic problem, is a good place to start. And right now we're about to go into the Global Plastic Treaty talks, and it's really the least that we can do if we want to even begin to think about participating in this in a real way, that we can really diminish the amount of plastic that we are putting, not only producing, but putting into the world. We are one of the biggest exporters of plastic waste. And right now, the U.S. has been pretty lackluster in their support of the global treaty. So you can imagine what we're doing on the national level is not really moving as well. As your film depicts, I mean, it's just crawling with lobbyists from industry. And right now, they are crawling all over the plastic treaty talks as well. We just sent out a letter about that, trying to get industry out of those talks. I mean, we didn't have that for tobacco. I mean, they have a vested interest in creating more plastic, not less. And right now, the talks have not talked about a reduction in production. They really want to open up avenues and loopholes for advanced recycling and chemical recycling to just be able to produce more plastic and basically burn it.
Yeah, so maybe you could just spell out just a couple of the main features of this legislation. What are some just like basic things that the bill would do?
It requires producers of packaging containers and food service products to design, manage, and finance waste recycling programs. A nationwide beverage container law bans certain single-use plastic products that definitely are not recyclable, but I actually argue that all plastic is not recyclable, but there are certain plastics we can reclaim and maybe repurpose in a way. Also ban single-use plastic carry-out bags and place a fee in distribution on remaining carry-out bags, which has been successful on the state level. So basically get away from all the single-use stuff. Establish minimum recycled content requirements for beverage containers, packaging, and food service products. Channel massive investments in U.S. domestic recycling composting infrastructure, which we would like to have it go more towards that infrastructure that does not include that these schemes, these plastic recycling schemes of burning and some of the other things that they're suggesting for industry. A big thing is prohibit plastic waste from being shipped to developing countries. Like that is not recycling. A lot of these developing countries, it ends up being burned. I mean, they can't handle it also. It never gets recycled really when it gets shipped away that way. Temporary pause on permitting new and expanded plastic production facilities, which they are gearing up to make even more. A report just came out today in The Guardian about how we continue at this rate, we're going to take up 1/5 of the remaining carbon budget, in the world, as far as emissions that plastic will become. And as you said, it's all tied into the fossil fuel industry. I mean, this is Plan B for the fossil fuel industry. Expand the definition of toxic chemicals and prohibit toxic chemicals to be included in the covered products, and incentivize greater reuse by tracking reusable packaging rates and creation of a pilot program to implement reuse and refill technology. And there's a whole lot more of that too. But also there's been some spin-off bills where we're abolished a foam bill, and also Plastic-Free Pellet Waters Act. We also have the Protecting Communities from Plastics Act, which is really helping these communities, protect them from these expansions and everything. It's a real environmental justice bill being headed by Cory Booker. So yeah, there's a lot of great things part of this bill. They call it ambitious, but I don't think it is. It's practical.
So anytime anybody does a story about a bill like this, there's going to be a fella from the industry. Usually it's a fella, sometimes it's a lady.
Yeah.
that will say, hey, you know, we have all these jobs, people are making a good living, you're going to pull the rug out from under them. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, I respond that a lot of this, they tout it as jobs and stuff, but when you look at these industries, there aren't a lot of jobs there. And a lot of times what they're doing is they're kind of nomadic, especially with a lot of these recycling, advanced recycling schemes and stuff. These guys are traveling with these corporations to set up these facilities and stuff, and they end up only, employing maybe 60, 70 people, and it's really automated. It's not really increasing jobs in that community, and the few jobs they do have, it's quite toxic, right? And then not to mention the amounts of emissions and pollution they're going to be spreading to that community as well. Going to be increased truck traffic, so they're inhaling all of these emissions from there. There's going to be even processing this stuff. If you're even the way that we're handling plastic right now, there's been tons of fires in just even these facilities where they're just baling the plastic and handling the plastic. It's quite not only toxic but also quite flammable. So there's a lot of risks to communities to have this increased infrastructure around this myth of recycling and handling of plastic. So it's becoming quite evident. And as we go into a lot of finding out about how much the health implications are, that the decrease in use of this needs to really come down. And the industry doesn't want to talk about that at all. So they'll tout jobs, but you think about a lot of these other alternatives end up creating jobs because, what I often point out is that when we have these reuse and refill and return systems, what you're doing is you're creating more local jobs. The money's staying local, right? And I think that that's going to be a lot of our answers to a lot of our problems with climate and everything else. You're not going to be traveling this far. Even your food is going to be fresher. You're going to have this whole locavore movement where you're trying to get food from a 100-mile radius. Think about that. You're going to have a higher nutritional content. You don't even need all that packaging, right? You get the bottle man back, and you have these local bottling plants where it all stays local. But industry and the way this is set up right now, it's all built around this whole fossil fuel infrastructure and waste, and having to use their fossil fuels just to transport this stuff and to go back and to import it and all this thing. So I think it's a win-win for communities, and ultimately even for industry. I think they're shooting themselves in the foot. This is a finite resource, and what are we doing with it? This is ridiculous that we're using it, especially for single-use plastic. I think it's a crime that we're doing it for single-use plastic, the more that we're learning about it.
And we have a question for you from the chat, Jackie. Could you please repeat which bill wasn't supported by any Republicans? Is that for all plastic reduction bills?
It turns out most of them are, unless that's something that's touting some sort of false solution. And then you'll start seeing Republicans going on because that's what industry wants. But no, this is the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act that that's featured in the film where they interviewed me. We had just gone through a lobby week, talking to our legislators about the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act. We were talking to Republicans and Democrats about it. What was really interesting, though, is a lot of times we had a few that would talk to us, directly, these legislators, but a lot of times you're talking to their staffers, right? And a lot of these young staffers, they all show up with their reusable water bottles and stuff. So that's already, it's ironic that this is already happening within the staffers, so they get it. So you're really trying to educate this, and the staffers are the ones really kind of doing the work, doing the research, and then reporting back to those legislators. I mean, they have so much on their plate. But they're unfortunately too, they're getting more inundated with these split presentations and everything from these lobbyists, special interests, where they're making it really easy for legislators to just repeat talking points, and not really even knowing what they're fully implicated for in some respects, and other respects very well knowing what they're doing and getting paid for it. These legislators to do so. So. It's the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act, but there's many more. I mean, pretty much every plastic pollution bill, if it's a real one that will actually mitigate and fix the problem, is going to not be supported by Republicans at this point. Unfortunately, it's become pretty partisan, which it shouldn't be. The environment shouldn't be. It's not even, like I said, it's not even good business sense. So they should be really looking at their bottom line in that respect.
And just out of curiosity, among Democrats, what would you say is the breakdown? How many, what's the sort of breakdown of percentage of Democratic legislators that are willing to go along with some of these bills?
I don't have the number at my handy right now. I'm looking at my notes here, but we have, I think we might have close to 100 Democrats that have co-sponsored, and then much more would probably vote in that respect. But we also have some Democrats that might be a little bit more swayed one way or the other, depending on where they're coming from, and really when you look at like follow the money, like who's they're not clean. Yeah, they're not, they're not free of this either. So
yeah, absolutely. I live in Pennsylvania, so I know exactly what you mean. Speaking of which, I think we have another clip that will feature Sean, so maybe we could cue that one up and we can come back to Jackie in a minute.
As an incentive for Shell to build their ethane cracker in rural Beaver County, the majority of state lawmakers voted for the biggest tax break in Pennsylvania's history. The belief was that it would boost the economy by tapping into the natural gas deep within the state's Marcellus Shale formation. By fracking, the drilling method that injects liquids at high pressure to fracture the rock and release liquid ethane, the main feedstock for making plastic. But from the very start of the Shell project, Pennsylvanians have been divided about the idea.
Pennsylvania residents have a constitutional right to clean air.
The petrochemical manufacturing industry that is waiting to be born will bring economic growth greater than Pennsylvania has already seen from the drilling.
No person's job has a right to make me, my family, and my neighbors sick.
The further use of Pennsylvania natural gas is necessary for greater job creation.
It's a mystery to me why we would permit any of it.
We need this stuff. We need the polyethylene. We use it every day.
Whether or not there's any shortage of plastic being made is another bone of contention, partly because the sheer volume of gas being extracted has spawned plans for more ethane crackers that would add to what critics say is already a global surplus of plastic.
The capacity to produce ethylene and polyethylene in the United States has increased by more than 50%. At the same time, China and other Asian countries have also been vastly expanding their ability to produce plastic. There is way more capacity to produce plastic than there is demand right now.
So that's Sean O'Leary. I'm going to throw this question to you. You spent a lot of time. I know we both have thought about this ethane cracker that was featured in the video, the largest tax break in Pennsylvania history. About 8,000 trades workers worked on the plant at the height of construction. It recently completed a couple years ago and is now producing plastic. It was immensely popular among legislators in Pennsylvania. It's sort of projects like that usually are. Shell spent $14 billion on it apparently, which was about double what they thought they would originally. But you've looked at the economic data surrounding the construction of this plant. Can you just summarize what you found and what you would argue the economic impact of this has been?
Oh, sure. There basically hasn't been any. The legislator that you heard earlier in the excerpt, talked about 4,500, 5,000 jobs. You just mentioned that the construction phase reached a peak of about 8,000, which is true. It happened in 2018 and 2019. And then, of course, immediately following that peak by 2020 and 2021, the number of jobs in Beaver County had reverted to less than there were before. And in fact, since the beginning of the fracking boom, since the beginning of the construction of the Shell ethane cracker plant, Beaver County now has fewer jobs than it has had in this century. It is at the bottom of the heap. And that, sadly, is indicative of what's happening in the natural gas and petrochemical industry throughout Western Pennsylvania. Because, as I mentioned in the excerpt just shown, the economics for the further expansion of crackers, at least in Appalachia, are virtually insurmountable right now because worldwide operating rates in cracker plants have dropped from their traditional 90% range down to below 80%. And it's precisely because there is a vast excess of capacity out there right now, to the point that it is at least in question as to whether the Shell cracker plant will ever become profitable. And in fact, I heard one industry analyst say the other day that he stopped referring to it as the Shell cracker and started referring to it as the cell cracker, because that's what he expects the outcome is likely to be. And so, right now, the Appalachian region is in the midst of two train wrecks. The first is that, of course, the Shell cracker has not produced either the jobs it was expected to or the downstream development in plastics manufacturers that we're supposed to spin off, but it just joins the fracking boom in the region in having that effect. The bottom line is that region-wide, since the beginning of the fracking boom, there has been a net loss of jobs in the region, despite the fact that output as measured by GDP has gone through the ceiling. So when you ask, what has been the economic outcome of this? The answer is that there is no measurable change in jobs or in incomes in the region. However, the environmental burdens that have been talked about, yes, have mounted considerably and has caused much of the region to go into population decline.
In fact, there was another ethane cracker that was planned for eastern Ohio in Belmont County, which is not far from the Shell plant featured in the video. And that plant was recently was sort of the last in a list of these proposed cracker plants in the region that have been canceled. So how do you see this sort of glut of production shaking out here in Appalachia and also in other parts of the country?
Well, the tragic outcome of this is going to be that the $1.6 billion subsidy that you alluded to that Pennsylvania extended to the Shell cracker plant is still going to be expended. The problem is, of course, that we're not getting anything in return for it. And that's a tragedy in two counts. Number one is it's a massive loss of public money to no useful end. But the other part of it is that for the last decade and a half, the region, and particularly in Pennsylvania, has largely decided to stop doing any other form of economic development apart from the development of the gas industry and its downstream industries, in the mistaken belief that by expanding the use of natural gas, that it is also producing job growth and income growth and all of those other economic benefits. But when you look at the numbers, that's not happening. Meanwhile, as the rest of the nation transitions to genuine renewable resources, genuinely clean resources, Pennsylvania and the region are to a large degree missing the boat, missing the opportunity.
Okay, we have just a few minutes before we're going to go to sort of some final thoughts here, but there's a couple questions from the crowd. I wanted to throw them out to our panel of experts. Are any of you, from Eileen Ryan, thank you, Eileen, are any of you addressing the issue of artificial turf? There's a huge push to install these plastic playing fields across the country. Artificial turf, have you seen this? Or obviously you've seen artificial turf, but has anybody worked on that?
Yes. Well, we don't have a specific campaign that we are leading, but we have had a lot of people reach out to us for resources and stuff. And there's really a great mostly moms actually getting together, and there's real organization happening around, especially the United States. And I know in Europe, they're starting to look at it as far as, keeping it from being put in their communities, the more that we're finding out about artificial turf. But yeah, it's become a big problem, and what they're finding is increase in cancer rates, and not only in I think one of the first studies were with women goalies, because the goalies were more on the ground, and a lot of times women are the canaries in the coal mine where they're getting the cancers first, and there's a high incidence of cancer rates between there. But the more that they're finding also about the shedding of this stuff, and usually it usually has a shelf life of less than 10 years, right? And then they have to pull it all up, or sections of it, and it's a mess in your community. And also what's happening in the waterways. They have slick presentations. I'm from California. When we had a drought, unfortunately, a lot of these guys from the Midwest, a lot of these companies will come in and do slick presentations, and they always end up coming in right at the cost that your budget is for that school or that organization, and showing exactly what they can do, and less mowing, less water. But it actually takes water too to clean this stuff. It's not a permeable surface, and you get the heat island effect. It's 20 degrees hotter, and all these things that are bad with it. So, and unfortunately, a lot of California, they were creating grants and subsidies to have people put these things in, but the more we're finding is it's just really bad. And it's kind of funny with me. I'm also was a ecological landscaper in Santa Cruz, going around with a little bike and a trailer and doing all this, electric mower and stuff. And I giggle whenever I see one of these lawns that have like seeds popping up of weeds and everything, and are kind of pulling apart, because they just don't last. But yeah, I'm going to get this article and share it as well, if I can get this.
Okay, that'd be great. We have one last question, and it's is the data used in this short clip open to the public? What are open source data sets available to the public that represent plastic, its release of toxins into the environment, and the effects of these toxins? So maybe just, talk about it, but maybe also put it in the chat. Any open source data sets on plastic and toxic releases into the environment? Does anybody have an answer to that?
Center for Environmental Health might be a good one to look into. The Environmental Health Network has a great newsletter and website that has a lot of the latest studies on a lot of these things. I would go that direction for research on that, but I don't have it available at my fingertips right now.
Okay, and lastly, let's see. We have a resource in the chat: Pass on Plastic Grass, Why Natural Options Win Over Synthetic Turf. Oh, that's
me, yeah.
That's you.
That's the link I was looking for.
Okay.
Did a blog post on that, yeah.
All right,
I always encourage people to call it plastic grass what it is, and not artificial turf when it's some benign thing. There's no turf there. It's plastic grass.
Interesting. All right, well, I wanted to get your guys' final thoughts here. And Gail, I want to throw it to you. When you're thinking about this issue, we're sort of having a discussion of plastic from the cradle to the grave, and you're sort of you live in a part of the world that is more the cradle of plastics. What are your final thoughts that you want to leave people here? What do you want them to know?
I want to leave with people the fact that man tries to capitalize off of whatever he thinks is going to make him money. And it doesn't matter how harmful it is to the environment or to people. And that's what we have to be conscious of. And we have to be even more conscious of our elected officials that we have, and pay attention to what they are doing. Because we didn't get all of this plastic all over this country like it is without localized elected officials just not giving a darn, or just not having the concept or the desire to go and really do their research and their homework into what what am I really letting out into the public?
Jackie, any final thoughts? Anything we haven't talked about that you think is important to mention here?
Yeah, I saw a question about the recent CBS News report about the myths of plastic recycling. I want to emphasize plastic recycling. A lot of times they're sensationalized in the headlines and just saying myths of recycling, and that's not true. It's plastic that has the myths. So a lot of times, I don't know if it's intentional or unintentional to kind of pit the environmentalists against recycling. We're for recycling, but really we're not for promoting this myth of plastic recycling. And we have, and I think that was a great segment. If anyone has seen it, I can try to look for the link to that as well. But it happened in CBS Sunday Morning, and it was a really great expose. It's been getting a lot of traction in talking about this report that just came out about how industry, same way industry knew about climate, industry knew that plastic would never be recycled, but continued that myth just to get people to use it more. I mean, as far back as 1956, there was a famous quote by I think he was like a plastics publication, whatever, Lloyd Stouffer, and he talked to the plastics industry in 1956 and told them that the future of plastics is in the trash can. If you can convince people to throw it away, you've got a whole nother market. And so here we are today. And we are working on really enforcing our own laws in California. We just passed one, SB 343, about truth in recycling. And even with that, to implement that law, Cal Recycle, who's supposed to be the one that part of the law is that you have to go and research what is recyclable in California, right? And so they have, and they came back with a report, and they even contradicted their own data showing that plastic actually isn't being recycled out of California, and actually a lot of it's being illegally exported to Mexico. But they omitted that from their report, so we actually spearheaded a sign-on letter to during their comment period to correct the report with their own findings, with their own things. But it was just really interesting to see, even at that level, when we pass a law and we have recycling organizations that are supposed to enact this or support it, they're not really enforcing it, and they're trying to look at ways. It's really interesting because I think there's a conflict of interest sometimes for recycling, because they want to continue that myth, because they still, right now, the way the system's set up, they still get some money, right, to take it. And I still encourage people, even though plastic has never been recycled by the true definition of it, to please sort it and put it in your recycle bin and let them deal with it. But for now, it's not all for naught. But at the same time, I would love to get plastic out of the recycling and have the manufacturers really be responsible for this stuff and take it back. That would be my goal, and deem it for the hazardous waste that it is, and they really have to deal with it on that respect and take it back and have the true cost of plastic be shown.
Okay, taking it back. Sean, we just have about a minute or two here. Any final thoughts about the growth of plastics in the region?
Just that I hope that, the journalists who are listening, as well as the citizens who are out there, will not accept at face value the claims that this is a case of jobs versus the environment. Because when you look behind the numbers or at the numbers, you'll find that in many cases, and in probably most cases, that's not the truth.
All right. Well, I want to just say thanks once again to our panelists here. Gail LaBeouf of Inclusive Louisiana, Jackie Nunez of the Plastic Pollution Coalition, Sean O'Leary of the Ohio River Valley Institute. It's been a pleasure talking with you all and meeting some of you. And I do want to encourage everyone to watch the movie when it comes to your town, or when it airs on your public radio, or when it airs on your public television station coming up soon. So thanks, everyone, and be well.
Godspeed, everyone.